Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to the DevOps Insight Forum. My name is Sam Fell. The DevOps Insight Forum is a monthly open space for professionals to chat about software development, delivery, and reliability. Today, we're talking about next level Devsec Ops, overcoming the silos. When delivering customer experiences from the cloud, defending the app and the data it houses or the business it represents is a priority. Devsec Ops, you build it, you run it, you secure it mindset helps, especially when all the teams are empowered with the info they need to see it, regardless of where it is. So join this panel as we discuss ways to bake security into your software delivery lifecycle, how application data can be used to identify fraud and risk, and how analytics and automation can help secure against threats. I'm joined by a fantastic panel of folks. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. I'm going to start with the person on the left, Mitch Ashley. Mitch, welcome back.
Hey, Sam. Great to be here with you. Mitch Ashley, Principal with Techstrong Research and CTO with Techstrong Group, DevOps.com folks. Folks are helping you put on this webinar today. So, Sam, it's great to be back. Thanks. This is a great topic. You know I love this topic. You couldn't even hold me back before the show started. So.
I know. It's been, so chat, audience, before the show, we do a 30-minute prep call. And this whole time, we've just been talking about stuff. There's 8,000 ideas that I would love to have you all hear, but those ones are gone. We're going to have to create new fantastic thoughts. So Mitch, welcome. Anais, welcome to you. Hi.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yes.
Yeah, my name is Anais. I'm the open source developer advocate at Aqua Security. So here it says developer advocate, but I'm really just focused on the open source tools. My puppy just started scratching in her crate. So she was quiet the entire time, and now she starts to be noisy. I'm really sorry about that.
No, that's great.
Yeah. Something else. Last year, I was working as site reliability engineer for a cloud native startup. So kind of combining that with now working with security related tools.
Wonderful. Well, we're happy to have you here. Thank you for joining us. Hey, Bruno, lovely background.
Thank you. Using all the features of the webinar software.
On the platform, lovely.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. Good to probably talk to many of you again. I'm Bruno. I'm one of the founders of a company called Sumo Logic. Sumo Logic is a cloud-native platform for observability and security, and this has been the highlight of my week. Every week we have it, so I look forward to the conversation.
Awesome, Sean. Great to see you. How you doing?
Man, I'm doing great. It's good to be back. I'm the chief security architect for NIQ. Also a big evangelist in the market. Love to connect with other security and just IT professionals to understand what they're learning and how they're growing in their organizations, and then focus on some developer relations and developer advocacy within our organization as well, kind of building those bridges to each of our teams.
Wonderful. Happy to have you here. And last but not least, George.
Hey, Sam. Hello, everyone. So George Gerchow, CSO, SVP of Sumo Logic. It's pretty cool to be managing such a diverse team. I've been here for coming up on 8 years, and I'm so glad to be doing this with Bruno. We work together. We don't do enough stuff like this together and everyone else. And then I feel like I've known Sean my whole life. We've only talked twice. So Mitch, everyone, I'm so looking forward to this, and yes, very much this conversation.
Fantastic. So we brought all these people together, all these big brains for you, audience, right? So ask questions via the chat. Mitch has just primed the pump, asking you all to sort of share where you're coming from. I see people from Italy. I see people from all over the place. Brazil, South Africa, Arizona, Denver, Colorado. So let us know where you're joining us from, and please add your comments, your questions in the Slack. We are not the only experts here. There are folks in the audience right now who have been doing this for a long time, and we would love to hear from you. We're going to get started with some data. Every month we do a poll on devops.com. If you haven't been there, go check it out. A lot of great research and articles for you to follow. But our friends over at Techstrong Research help us with a poll on their website. And the first question that we're going to ask, and we're going to ask you in the audience as well, is what is DevSecOps? Is it a set of processes and tools? Is it a cultural shift? Or is it a bias towards cross-functional team engagement? Choose one and let us know what your thoughts are. and we'll see how well we align with the masses. Hyderabad, Nigeria. I love it.
Wow.
What an international audience. Whoa.
I
I know, right?
I love
Very
it.
cool.
Yeah. All right. Wow. Overwhelmingly has to do with culture. Cultural shift to promote shared ownership of security outcomes. So I'm going to ask the folks on this panel, what do you think? Seem legit? Pass the sniff test?
Mm-hmm.
I love it.
I think so.
All right, right on. Okay, so there's not a lot of. Go ahead.
There is a all of the above for sure. For a
Hmm,
lot of
good
us.
point.
Sure.
But yeah,
But if you had to
I
choose
think
one,
I think that's the one.
that's the one. Yeah.
Yeah, what about 5-10 years ago? You would have seen a set of tools and processes just dominating the charts. So it's good
Yeah.
to see that starting to normalize.
Yep. Berlin. Holy cow. The UK.
Or one that said the developers will do security.
Yeah. Awesome. And so how does that line up with what we saw from the larger audience at devops.com? 65%. So again, the breakaway favorite. However, there are potentially a lot more people on devops.com who are not more as interested in this topic as the folks who are here, because you see a set of tools and processes, which we all sort of assumed was a more immature answer.
We always get a little bit of selection bias because we're here for this topic.
Exactly. So all of you who are out here listening in, you guys are smarter than everyone else on the internet. Just so you know. All right. Next one. I think DevSecOps is primarily focused on, and choose whatever the best one is. Whatever you think the best one is. And there are no right answers or wrong answers, except for the ones that we say are the right answer.
Unless we change our mind.
Yeah, unless the data shows us different, and then
Yes.
we'll go with the data. That's fine. I'm a good guy to go with the data.
Jump in, everybody. Send in your vote there.
There we go. Yeah, governance, risk, and compliance. Anybody have any thoughts on that? That seems reasonable.
Yep.
Seems reasonable.
I'm sure it's all our favorite
Somebody else
stuff.
start.
Right? I think it is interesting, though, the SDLC pipeline. It's a big one because when people talk about DevSec Ops,
That's where I voted.
they're talking about the pipeline. We talk about trying to tighten up that pipeline. So it's not unreasonable to have that be another contender. So that's
Yes, Sam, I think it's worth, like, even in the chat, asking why governance, risk, and compliance. I mean, I think we all have opinions on what that is, but I'd love to hear from the audience as to why.
You heard them, chat. Let's hear what you got. Come on, light it up.
Bring it.
Bring it. Bring it. Why is it GRC, or why is it something else? Right.
Participant 381 said they totally grok with this answer. They're in healthcare.
Yeah, exactly. All right, let's see what the rest of the folks said. All right, so interesting. So governance, risk, and compliance was high. SDLC pipeline was much higher. So interesting. All right.
Just out of curiosity, do you think that the SDLC pipeline would have been the lion's share had we asked, what do you think DevOps is primarily focused on versus DevSecOps?
Oh, yeah. I think, much more. I agree with
It depends. I guess it depends on what other questions there were, because you could also, you could answer DevOps. You could have said the same thing that you said back here. Cultural shift to promote shared ownership of operational outcomes or whatever, of innovation or whatever. Right. Sorry.
Can you go back to the last, this one?
I gave away all the answers.
Yeah, I struggle with this one a whole little bit. It's really, and maybe it's the question and how the answers are posed. It feels to me like the governance, risk, compliance is a little bit of a catch-all. Like, I actually answered operational concerns because to me, the operating of the whatever the target of the security and monitoring is the primary concern. But it's interesting. Like, I struggle with this question. Like, I had a really hard time picking.
Ooh.
I would actually argue that it depends on your background. Like, for example, the open source engineers that I'm mostly working with, they would, I guess, focus on the pipeline stages, like depending on what they are mainly working with, right? Versus actually the compliance part. They are not necessarily the ones who, I don't know, think about it a lot. Again, depending on what they're working on and like their projects. But yeah, I'm curious if like the people who are joining right now, what their main roles are as well.
Yeah, and George, I'm going to echo your sentiment on participant 367, and I have a thought about the fact that we have so many anonymous folks on the Devsec Ops call, and we've never had any anonymous people on any of our other non-security related episodes. So definitely understand the audience, which is good. But participant 367 in the chat, Gov risk compliance is the why, SDLC is part of the how, and the operational piece is the feedback loop, which I think is just it's spot on.
That's pretty damn good.
Yeah, that's what we intended. That's why we wrote it that way.
Pretty good. Yeah.
Thanks. You're spot on.
All right. What is the most critical aspect of DevSecOps?
Oh, I love this one. Here's where to get into it. Because I'm going to disagree with myself.
Oh boy.
Strong opinions loosely held. That's a good way of doing it. All right, put your votes in. You do not do DevSecOps to be compliant, so your auditor won't yell at you, but it's more around because you would never leave home with the door open. Well, that's true. That is also true. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, the compliance stuff is there because you don't want your door to be open. The compliance is just the reminder that makes sure that you close your door. Right? Did you close your door?
To prove that you did it.
Yeah. All right. Shifting left.
Close.
It is very close. Building agility and resilience.
I knew this was going to be close. I want to know what the others are too, though. But look. So I'll say this. I very much voted number one, but I think we've been arguing against number two for too long. This was a huge internal argument at Sumo Logic. Remember, Bruno? Heated to where people were like getting really upset. And if the community sees it as number two, breaking down the silos, who the hell are we to argue? If it truly is bringing together these disparate silos in organizations, why would we argue that?
I think maybe what you're saying too, George, is it depends on where you are, right? It's all a matter of where you stand. If silos are the barrier, you got to get through that first to even think about shift left or more resilient software. So that might be a big aspect of this answer.
What's interesting is people talk about breaking down silos all the time, but what I don't hear often is people talking about building bridges, right? We're going to have silos. I mean, think about security by nature. Separation of duty is telling us that we need to silo off certain activities. We just need bridges into those activities to ensure that the right things are coming in and out when they're synthesized, to ensure that the folks upstream and downstream that have dependencies on them can do what they need to do. Silos are good sometimes, right? It's just another tool that we use. But I think it's one of those, like we talked about, George, before, is, arguing back and forth about the marketing terms, right? How do you get people to buy in with shifting left and breaking down silos? And
I think one thing about this is there is a school of thought, I think we've probably all held around security, is we're separate so that we can be the protection, right? We're preventing the organization from doing something they shouldn't do. And so we have to maintain that separation of duties. That right there will, of course, create your silos too. And I think there's maybe still some of that thinking, but a lot less of it is, we actually have to work really close together and help each other to create great, secure software.
Yeah. I'll just chime in on this one just briefly. I think that the object of the dev and security teams has shifted in terms of what data is used to achieve the objective. In the old world on-prem, security was mostly looking at perimeter data. The dev teams were looking at application data. When you move to the cloud, there is no perimeter. Security moves closer to the workload. Application is at the center of everything. And you cannot do physically security and ops without the two teams crashing their heads together, because the data is similar. Aqua Security is here, right? Why? Because we are securing and working on making sure that the very, very much application infrastructure is secure. And that is, I just don't see a way of piecing that apart and separating into silos. It just doesn't work anymore.
So let's see how we ready to go and see how we compare to the masses.
Mhm.
This is a very educated group, so I'm assuming we're going to just crush it. We're going to get all the right answers. All right. Go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was waiting for this one.
Yeah.
What do you think about this, Aeneas? You haven't really said much about this one, but what do you see? Especially being a former SRE, do you see it? I mean, I'm guessing you're seeing it as number one. I'm putting kind of maybe my foot in my mouth, but what do you hear about number two as well, 2 and 3?
Well, in terms of number one, I wouldn't vote for that because I just don't believe in shifting left. And that's a strong statement, I guess, but it's just it relates to the ownership from the previous question of what is Devsec Ops about, right? And I don't think that shifting left is necessarily compatible with creating ownership. Those are my thoughts on this question, but yeah, and then again, it depends on the size of your company and kind of how your company is built up, and depending on that, you will have different focuses.
Yeah.
It depends.
That's great, Anais. It is interesting, though, to see the number of people that chose that. And again, I think that's some of the marketing that folks have been doing. That's really interesting. I think building agility and resilience into the shared processes is a if you can do that, then you pretty much do anything.
That's kind of the ultimate goal, right?
Yeah.
It's totally the ultimate goal, but I'm going to go back to number one and give an argument there. First, you have to change the mindset. A lot of people will think this is not my job, and that is a fact. Anyone who's worked with large development companies, I was at VMware before I came here. I was at EMC, several startups. The mentality has to change to make people realize that this is part of the responsibility. I'm going to go back to SRE teams. I think SREs usually can be the best security people in the company, right? They're responsible for 1/3 of the CIA triad, which is availability. But a lot of times they're like, I don't give a shit. I'm just pushing out this workload. That's what's happening right now. Until you start massaging and practicing that in, that I would rather bake that in now than have to respond to it later. And sometimes that is a shift in thinking.
Well, and you can't weaponize your movements in your organization either. So many times you see organizations that adopt DevOps or DevSecOps, and they'll say, oh, security is everyone's responsibility. And then what that translates into is, hey, developers, you're going to have to start doing security. And then eventually, hey, developers, you're the ones that are responsible for security in your own stuff, to the point where they're alienated.
I think security being everyone's responsibility means it's nobody's.
Yes.
That's effectively what usually happens. But
it depends on how you empower people, right? Like I think one of the things that we've done pretty well is, for example, whenever we go to roll out a new security tool that's going to affect the pipeline, we let the developers select those tools, and so that way they feel super, super empowered by what it is that's affecting their pipeline. And so we're just providing guardrails and not being blockers. Mm-hmm. And I think that helps out quite a bit, but there's steps to it, I can't remember the participant's name now who was so smart and jumped in there and led that all off. 367. 367, the way that they broke that down, I think the first piece is people have to shift their mentality. Then after that, they can start getting better at some of the rest of this stuff.
Yes.
Awesome. Gentle people, we must continue. So going to the next panel, the next polling question, where are you? This is for you in the chat. Where are you on your DevSecOps journey? Oh no, we need a poll first.
I didn't hear
today.
I keep messing it up. I'm giving away all the answers. All right, Cody, push our last poll, please.
So it doesn't actually look like I have this one loaded up. My apologies.
Oh, that's okay, because this is the longest we've ever spent on the polling questions. I knew this would be a rowdy group. So where are you on your DevSecOps journey? Please in the chat, let us know if this makes sense, if this aligns with what you're thinking. The lion's share here, we're not there yet, right? They haven't quite achieved what they would consider to be DevSecOps, although I don't know that you'll ever achieve it. right? But you're on the journey.
What's the measurement?
Can we? Oh, go ahead.
It's whatever people think the measurement is, Sean. It's a very informal poll. Sorry, we're not Nielsen. We're
No,
not.
I mean, what's the measurement for Devsec Ops? You know, people say we're not there yet. I'd be interested in hearing what is your organization's measurement and considering that you're doing Devsec Ops.
Or what
Right,
the
yeah.
definition of it is.
Exactly.
Yes.
So throw
Right.
it in the chat.
Yeah.
What's your definition?
I mean,
20%. Go ahead, Anais.
now just along those lines, when defining what it means, right? I would be curious what people would define as a self-sustaining DevSecOps team and culture, like the self-sustaining part. How does that look like?
Mhm.
I can't really, like, I wouldn't really have an answer to that.
Mhm.
I also you're missing an answer here. It says whatever George said.
Nice.
That's the other.
I think Sean nailed it. Like, that is a really, really good question. What is the expected outcome? I think you're going to see continual improvement, and that's always a good thing. But I don't know what that final measurement is. I really don't. Like, how can someone stand up and say, yes, we've done it, we've achieved it? It's like saying that I've completed zero trust and I'm done. It's a never-ending journey.
That's right.
Unless you have bacon and coffee, according to the chat.
Bacon and coffee. That would solve everything. All right. And now it's time for all of you to get engaged and actually start talking. Right?
Very nice.
Oh, wow. All right. So somebody asked, well, what does that mean? Sean, I think it was who asked, what does that mean? So Sean, guess what? I'm going to ask you to go first, sir, please.
Oh, awesome.
Yes.
All right, so I'll share with you my philosophy, which might be a little controversial.
Good.
That I've learned as I've gone through this journey for, I don't know, what's 8 years now. DevSecOps has been around since we just started talking about what that might be, and the manifesto was created and everyone started creating their definitions. Honestly, I think, you call it Sec DevOps. I've seen it called DevSecOps. I've seen it, referred to as security in DevOps, however you want to put it. It's just a name, right? It's really a marketing term that people use that defines what security is doing as they come to the table to work with developers and operations. But for me, DevSecOps is a relationship. It's all about the relationship security, developers, and operations have in working to achieve a common outcome. It's really that simple. There are no tools. I mean, it's part culture, it's part tools, it's part process, all of those things. But it's how do you develop those relationships to understand what it is? There is no framework or platform that works for everyone, right? It's going back to like when you look at Agile, everyone wants to adopt the Spotify model because Spotify found, success in that. Everyone wants to adopt Lean because Toyota found success in it. It's what does it mean to you and your organization? How are you curating that relationship between your security development teams and operation teams to achieve your common outcomes and objectives? Just my perspective.
I love it. So I've asked the chat to come up with 3 words. How do you describe DevSecOps in 3 words? And don't use the words DevSecOps because that's not fair. All right. Anais, what are your thoughts on this?
Love that.
With this DevSecOps. I'm gonna say that it's the process of ensuring that your customers never have to care about the security state of your application. So, and what I mean by that is that your customers will care a lot about any other like metrics of your application, right? Whether it's response time or just working properly, right? They will constantly care about that, right? Whenever any site is down, you care about that. You don't constantly think about whether or not the applications that you're using are secure, right? Until you get notified or you check your email and have I been pwned or something like that, and that's where you see that you have been involved in any data breach or similar, right? In any attack. And I think with DevSecOps, like when we deploy an application, we can do that without any security focused tools, anything related to security, and our customers might still be happy until they're not, right? So I think DevSecOps is to me like the process of ensuring that it stays that way, that people don't have to care about it.
I love that focus on the end user experience as part of the whole goal for this is not just to protect against threats. It's applying that to protecting your customers.
Yes.
So I love that. That's really great. George, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so for me, I'm kind of going off the chat here as well too. I think it's design from the beginning, designing it, especially through the SDLC CI/CD pipeline. That's what it's always meant to me, and it goes back to something that Sean said early on, which is building bridges. End users don't know what they don't know, and here's what I'm going to say about that. Like, even this whole struggle we've had for years around MFA, and MFA's got a whole bunch of different problems that are in the news right now with MFA fatigue and everything else. But if you start just having these same repeatable patterns that they get used to, and then they have a good experience, the last thing they ever want is to have a trusted company like health and wealth organizations get compromised. Once that happens, and then you better believe that they start thinking more about security and what's taking place. And that's what we're seeing across the board right now is people are going after health and wealth to disrupt everyone's lifestyle and to start taking that information.
Nice. And I see Bruno put his 3 words down.
Oh, I love that. So
very
smart.
good. Ownership, responsibility, and accountability and collaboration. So it's a little more than 3 words, but those are all good. Ownership, I think, is really good.
Yeah.
So Bruno, share more on that. What are your thoughts?
I mean, it's really, I struggle a little bit with all of these because there's so many yes answers in both the survey and everywhere. But ultimately, to me, it's, as we go through dramatic increase in rate of change and mission critical workloads, as we move to the cloud, implement agile, things are changing quickly. We as teams, are starting to take more responsibility and ownership of these apps. That's the only way to run it. And as we do that, as we accelerate the rate of change, we at the same time must bring cross-functional knowledge into making the outcomes right. And the outcomes are really, at least for this audience, is it running reliably? Is it running securely? Right. And so, the way to do it, I think right now is to collaborate. I elaborated on that a little bit ago. And so, people take a bigger sense of ownership. They take a bigger sense of pride into how things are running. They recognize their own workloads out in the wild. Their businesses are depending on these digital applications that are facing customers, generating revenue. And that drives motivation and ultimately collaboration if you have the right culture built into the team. So that's what it is to me. I know it's nebulous and vague here, but I think fundamentally it'll result in outcomes that are better than they used to be.
Yeah, and I think that the bolt-on stuff that Mitch started in the chat, I think that's a really good point because that world sucked. That was absolutely terrible. And I'm going to show my age here, but going back to days where DBAs would roll out these huge SQL environments and then keep the SA password blank. Then all of a sudden, if you try to make a change to that or any service passwords, everything got screwed up. You couldn't patch anything during the day. You couldn't do any kind of vulnerability assessments during the day, because it bring down pride. And it's like, no, that's the best time to do it because that's when everyone's active. And I never want to go back to that world. And I think that that's why this whole world of cloud and agility and what Bruno was saying around reliability and security of apps is so important to be able to do that.
I posted about security is designed in, right? Not just in the product, but in all the process and the environment that it works in. And sometimes it's not a perfect analogy, but safety is a good analogy if you think about a car. You can't go back in and add a crumple zone at the end of the manufacturing line. You can't bolt on, airbags. You can't bolt on sensors to proximity sensors for detecting a crash or, parking safety, things like that. But it's not just the object that you're creating, it's the environment it's being created in, right? You want the manufacturing process, that environment, wherever that's at, that factory or factories, those need to be safe too. And the machines and the things that you're all pulling together, that's kind of our DevOps tool chains. And of course, in the world then that it operates in, right, we also want it to be we want it to be safe. So we're collecting telemetry data. We're looking at traffic that's ahead of us and maybe auto braking if there's an issue coming on. So it kind of fits in some nice ways. That's what designing in security is, not just it's a feature check mark. We've got it.
And Anais answered the why, which I think is fantastic. I think that was really great. So what are some of the challenges, and the folks in the chat, let us know what some of the challenges you've had across the different teams. Are there different challenges for dev folks than for security folks or for ops folks when you're moving to this model where you have this sort of shared ownership, which, as we said, if everyone owns it, no one owns it. But what are some of these challenges for getting organizations to go that way? Sean, you coughed, but I started with you last time. So I'm going to start with George because he's smiling. So,
I'm always smiling.
yeah, so you're going to be first.
I think so. Let's peel off one word, which is adoption. I think when you're first getting into it, you're gonna have friction. I mean, it's just going to happen. The friction is usually like a little bit underlined, but all of a sudden, when you start trying to adopt this kind of methodology, because that's what I believe it is, you're going to have some natural friction because people are going to have to change the way they work. But here's what I'd like to say to security people out there is, I think a lot of security people, when they're getting started on this journey or going down it, they try to take what they've always done and cram it down the throats of development. And that's, I think, the wrong approach. You got to figure out how developers work, and then try to adopt their processes and make those better to align with what you want your outcomes to be. And that's the only way this is going to work. But there's always some friction in there in the beginning. And ops is kind of interesting to me because a lot of times, the operational roles and obviously, IT reports up into me. I said that in the beginning. I think the role of ops is a little bit different when we're starting to talk about cloud. I see almost like the SRE teams as being more the new IT teams when it comes to cloud. It's just a little bit different. IT folks don't touch it as much. They're very much in SaaS-based apps, but maybe not infrastructure as a service, like something like AWS, GCP, or Azure, or whatever your choice is. But for me, I think it's going to be friction in the beginning and learning how to work together, learning how to have that respect, that communication, and then ultimately, what's the outcome we all want to make this better?
Yeah, finding those shared goals is really the key, I think, because then people want to work towards that goal, and you're not working against anyone; you're working towards a goal. Excellent, Anais. What are your thoughts? You've seen this movie a bunch of times. Where do people have problems?
Well, it really depends on the company. When I was working last year as site reliability engineer, it was mainly, first of all, that we didn't have a security focused person within the organization. So we hired an intern to implement the security tools.
Did you say intern?
Security scanning. Yeah, an intern. So
okay.
Yeah, exactly, like a student, right? Like a not high school, university student, right? And I mean that's like the first challenge of like who can actually do it, right? Like who has the capacity, the availability, right? Again, security is not necessarily something that you have to do to deploy your application and to have your infrastructure running properly. And a lot of times, at least with our team, we took care of like we followed security best practices. We took care that our processes, our workflows are secure. We just didn't have a way to verify that, right? It's just like we follow container best practices, but then how do you actually know that everything worked as it should? And I think gaining that visibility is like the first challenge. There's so many tools available of like, we know what we're supposed to do. Like we all know that we're not supposed to open a spam email, right? But then how do we verify that on a larger scale, that we didn't actually mess up somewhere in the process? So I think finding a tool and getting started is like the first part of like, where should you get started? Who's going to get started? These kind of questions. Yeah.
Okay. So you think the tooling helps? I have this an analogy that I use where my wife doesn't like camping. If I took her camping with crappy equipment, she would like camping even less. If I took her camping and I went to, I had a nice platform tent and it had like china and crystal and everything everywhere, she'd probably like it. So the right tools can definitely impact the experience of trying new things.
I made
I
lots of risk the first time I took my wife camping.
There, see, exactly. You got to sort of.
Dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think it's about finding the right tool first, and or like having somebody who knows how to find that tool that's applicable to your application stack, to your workflow, and then from there, it's going to be a lot easier down the line. Yeah, but I think that would be the first challenge that I see a lot of people that I'm talking to about Trivy, for example, or open source security scanner, of like how do you get started? Why this tool versus any other tool? Things like that.
Right. Excellent. All right. Let's see. Mitch.
Yeah, I was thinking too, we talked about shared goal, and I totally agree with you, Sam, about that. I think it also, if people have an opportunity to contribute to the solution, even if it's just the process, they may not contribute an idea, but they may be part of the team, or they may contribute ideas, something that becomes better than the idea that they created. Now you have a sense of owner. That's part of that ownership, that we were talking about before. So oftentimes DevSec and Ops have internal goals to themselves, and that's largely what they're measured on. And they don't intersect, and sometimes they're counterproductive too. So I think finding that goal that's outside of just yourself, that everybody ties to, or set of goals. Maybe it has to do with the end customer, the digital experience, the whatever, the environment we're deploying in, mobile applications. You can find things that we can all point to of here's what we're doing, here's how we can help, because then we can work together to achieve that.
Alignment. It's all about alignment. Shared goals is super, super important. All right. Sean, let's hear what you got to say about this topic.
I feel like Bruno stole my thunder in the
That's okay.
chat.
We got plenty of other topics. So if you want to take a pass on this one and just defer to your colleagues, I think that's okay.
I'll keep it short. So there are two things I'll pull back the ugly covers on for adoption challenges. I've done 31 transformations over about the last 15 years. And the two things that I see that just cripple DevOps, DevSecOps, any of these adoptions, even like Agile, is ownership. That's the number one. And it's, it ranges from anything like aligning incentives of leaders to get on board with making this work, right? It's got to be more than just engagement, right? They can't just sign the piece of paper and say, go do this, here's your budget. They've got to be involved. They've got to show that they're invested and that they're working with even the lowest levels of the organization to provide that continuity of vision to ensure that it's executed properly. The second one is defining what good security looks like. And what I mean by this is think about just the paradigm between a public and a private company, right? With a public company, you've got all of these sticks that you can use. So I gotta have PCI compliance, or I lose my certification and customers aren't going to do business with me, right? And you use that, or the organization may use that to force the program compliance or the materialization of the program to ensure that everyone is on board. But when you look at a private company, a lot of those sticks don't exist. And there's not any just generic switch that you can flip sometimes. So it's really taking control of that destiny and saying, what does good look like to everyone? What does it look like to our customers? What does it look like to our development teams, to our leaders, to our community, to our market, to our industry? And then setting that bar and driving toward that and continually raising that bar.
Yep. I love that. What does good look like? That is a hard question. And Bruno, I'll let you comment on this slide as well if you have thoughts.
Sure. I think, look, ownership is I think a challenge. George and I have seen this in our organization, right? Once you sort of kind of both imply and ask and require people to collaborate on things, they do this, mine, stay away. And, it does require a lot of that cultural change and understanding, but we are humans, and humans like to own things and don't like other people touching their things. And I don't know, if you have kids, you know how this works.
If you've ever driven on the highway in the left lane behind somebody who won't go faster, and you pull to the right to try and pass them, and they speed up.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, everyone's had that experience.
That's right.
That's humanity there.
So I think that's a challenge, and it comes from personalities and what your sort of what your culture looks like, how you define it, and how you drive it, and how you reward the right behavior and all that stuff. And ultimately, that's a challenge that every organization will probably have to overcome to some degree.
So, folks, this is an important question. So we've been talking about Devsec Ops and how you get there, but how does that thing that we've been talking about influence your strategy around GCR? How did those two things tie together, and how do you think about that? Who shall I start with? This is kind of a tricky one, so I'm gonna ask people to raise their hand. Sean is already putting something, so Sean, you're going first.
Oh,
Okay.
just replying to the people in the chat. All
Oh,
right.
sorry, Sean. Sorry. Okay, no problem. Mitch, you had your hand up. Go for it.
Yeah, what I'm thinking about is, I think there's multiple ways to answer this question, of course, but one is that because we think about things in terms of process and workflow and pipelines, we also think about automation, tools, technologies. We think about people and how they fit into the process. So much of governance and compliance and audit is data. It isn't what you're supposed to do. It's proving that you said you're doing what you said you were going to do, whatever that is. So many audits, so many compliance requirements it doesn't tell you how to do it. It just says, what are you going to do? And then you have to prove that you're going to do it. And I think if you kind of build this into your system, right, of how you work, a lot of that data collection, a lot of that information is now an outcome of the work you do, not additional work you have to do. I mean, yes, sure, there's some you have to do. But hopefully that can increasingly over time make both determine when we're not in compliance and help us solve it early, but also supply, we have to do these things to stay in business. They're not, just for funds, and giggles. We really have to do them. And there's people whose job is to help us get there. So I think that's how I look at one of the big drivers why, and maybe that's at least partly why that was such a high response on that poll.
Yeah, that's interesting. So George, your comment, it may be true, but it feels a little glib because security folks have been blockers for a long time, right?
It's true. Right.
It may be true, and I'm not going to put that out there because I don't classify myself as a security person. I don't want to throw stones, but could I posit that perhaps Dev and Ops, so DevOps was not easy either, right? Think back to when that motion started. Those two folks, you think that security should be earlier in the process, should almost be Sec DevOps, right? Okay. But we have DevOps. Those two finally learned how to get together. Security was this afterthought. It was something that the ops teams had to deal with after everything was working. And so trying to pull them in, it's even further away from that Dev and Ops group. That's my interpretation. That's my thoughts on it. I've been interesting. I got a chuckle or a guffaw from folks. So I'm eager to hear what I said that was not aligning with what they thought. So George, you guffawed.
Yeah, look, I just think that when you think about developers in an organization, they don't interact with as many people. They're kind of in their own space. I remember when I was coming up, I used to just laugh because they were like vampires. Like the room where they'd work in the office would be all dark and they'd have their screen on. But security people don't really discriminate. They have to interact with the entire organization, whether security training, whether it's IT, all the different lines of businesses. And I think in the past, we made things so extremely difficult on everyone else and couldn't see past the control. Because Mitch is right when he talks about compliance. Compliance is really verifying what you said you were going to do, like ISO 27001, for example. But compliance people have a habit, and Bruno and I just had to discuss someone on my team recently on Friday that are like this, that nope, this is the way of the world. This is what it says. This is what the control is. Thou shalt do that control. That's never going to work. You got to look at the control but also what is best for the business and how to best implement that control. And I'm just going to give a really quick one here, and then I'll shut up in a second. For example, when we were first doing FedRAMP, there was a requirement in the controls that said you had to have a 15-minute session timeout if you weren't continually logged into an app. So all of a sudden, what decision did we make in all of our brightness was we're going to log everyone out of those apps that they're idle in every 15 minutes. How do you think that went over? Instead of really looking at it and going, okay, so how can I meet that control, but also do what's right for the business, meaning I can do it through SSO, I can do it through VPN, and get creative about how I roll that out to where it doesn't disrupt these people who are trying to do their jobs and get things done. And so I do think, and maybe it's because I'm a security person, I think a lot of the onus is on us. I don't think that we've communicated really well over the years. It's not other people's jobs to do so. And so we have to be better influencers, better ambassadors of what we do.
Awesome. Sean, you could thought as well.
So many thoughts here. So many. First, I'll come back to it, but I think you asked the question backwards. It should be, how does governance, compliance, and audit strategy influence Devsec Ops?
Okay.
Just
fair
my
enough.
perspective.
Okay.
Second, I realize that I'm coming from a biased place, but I'll just speak my mind. I felt it was a little unfair to say, historically, like security people have always been confrontational or, been the problem with these things. I believe this dates back to the beginning of software, right? Explain to me why software is the only engineering discipline that does not have security built in from the beginning, right? Electrical engineering, hey, turn the breakers off before you work on the outlets so you don't shock yourself. Architectural engineering, hey, make sure that you account for all the books if you're going to build a library so you don't sink the building into the ground. People who design stoplights, there's timings in there to make sure that they're going to be, just security is built into everything that has to do with engineering. But from the start of development, you don't see that. You go to schools, you take CS classes, they're not talking about security equally as they are with just developing code and writing code and leveraging, building structures, whatever that may be. And I think that's from a maturation perspective, security came along much later because of requirements, right? You can call it triggered by hacking. You can call it triggered by the demand for something that was more functional for our customers, but security needs arose, early 2000s really became more prevalent. And we were really figuring out where we fit into things, right? And this was because of the government, the governance and compliance and the audits that we had to prove to our customers that we were doing the things that we said we were doing, and we were making it safe for everyone, our internal clients as well as our external clients. And I think if you take a macro view of the organization, it's easy to point out one group that may be the problem. But in my experience, I think we're all difficult to deal with at times. And security just happens to be the one that's in the crosshairs right now because we're catching up for everything that's been there. I mean, development was around long before security was ever a discipline that was adopted by organizations and espoused by all of these government regulations and requirements that we're bound by today. Just my 2 cents there. And as far as government's compliance and audit strategy, how it influences DevSecOps, how I see it should influence DevSecOps is the governance, compliance, and audit should drive how effective the measurements for DevSecOps feed back into it. So what I mean by that is if there is a FedRAMP requirement, how effective DevSecOps is how effective we are at meeting that. How effective our audits come back should dictate the maturity of our DevSecOps practice within the organization, right? DevSecOps is validating we are doing these things well.
Awesome. And Bruno, did I hear from you on this question? I don't believe I did yet.
No, but I think
I've not heard from you either.
But I think you Sean and George and everybody else nailed it on this one. So I think it's and I do, now that I'm reading this question, it does make sense what Sean said. It's asked in reverse. GRC has been around forever, and it's a framework. And how do the things you do impact those outcomes? So makes sense. And so I'll just let you go on to the next person or next question.
Anais, do you have thoughts on this, or should we go to the next the next topic.
You think Sean gave a lecture? So good. We can
Awesome.
move on. I'm fine.
Awesome.
Good,
I
great.
love that. All right. So this one I think is fun. This is going to be the fun question. We are where we are today. Folks in the chat, you are where you are. Where will we be in 24 months? That's a good one. This is an interesting one because I'm excited to see where we'll be. Who would like to go first? Has anyone got something ready to go?
I'm happy to go. Happy to go, if you want, Sam.
Go for it.
I think I always look at what are both people and organizations' motivation for why we do things, why we adopt things, why we change, why we set things as a direction. There's a lot of interest in application security right now. Of course, that's just one part of it. But I think the more the technology community basically makes security easier, just like end users want security easy. We do too, right? We don't want to spend a lot of time working on security in our code. We don't want to spend a lot of time implementing tools and responding to messages that say we have bad code. So I think this is the build it in phase, whether it's us or tooling or processes. And I think if that's the concentration, I think we'll make some really big advancements in the next 12 months. Not saying every application is going to be totally secure. I posted in there that security is not binary, right? It's a balance of a whole bunch of factors: money, time, people, skills, etc. But the more we can not have to work on it, if you can take it away as something for me, I'm all for it, right? I'll sign up for that program any day. And that doesn't mean it goes away, but I think that that can be a focus that will make a market difference. I'm maybe tilting a little bit at windmills, but I'll do some tilting. Maybe we'll get there.
Excellent. All right. Who's got a prediction? Anybody? Somebody else?
I think it's going to just start fading away. I think that people are just going to start hopefully behaving more and more this way, and we're not going to talk about it every 5 minutes like zero trust. It'll just become a concept that all of us use as people get more and more educated, but it's already one of those terms that irritates people. You know, I feel like it does. You know, if you walk through RSA's floor last year, which, by the way, I was grateful, super grateful to go back to RSA last year, which I never thought I'd say. But the architecture was real, Sean. Everywhere I look, zero trust, Devsec Ops, and then people trying to sell product under that. Like, we solve world hunger because we do zero trust or we do Devsec Ops, and it's just not that. And so I think as the world matures and we start getting more into agile development, and then it's just going to be the way that we naturally behave. Oh my gosh, 367. That just irritated me looking at it, but it's really fun.
Oh man.
That's great.
Go, Sean.
Awesome. Okay. Bruno, thoughts on this?
I got COVID at RSA this year, George. Thank you very much.
So sorry, man.
But so not so grateful. However, I do think that 24 months from now, the cross-pollination of techniques is going to happen. I think in part, at least tools and some of the processes. I do think that more and more, of the sort of security controls, security rules, SIM rules, alerting for security will sort of get pulled into, generated through code, right? CI/CD, config as code, all of that stuff is going to happen. Right now, you still are seeing people manually creating rules and all of that stuff in tooling and what have you. I think the development and monitoring has started doing it. There's monitoring as code and all of that. We're going to see more of that happening with security. I do also think that security has somehow pioneered a little bit more of the automation response orchestration, and I think those techniques are going to get sucked in more into the dev side, response to incidents on reliability and things like that. And so I think we're going to see more of this sort of process and tools integration across these two functions into, I think, a more effective way of managing incidents. And I don't specify whether those are security or reliability incidents, but basically there's lots to learn from each other. And I think as that happens, it'll also get easier and more natural to collaborate.
Love it. Anais, Sean, thoughts? Where are we going to be in 24 months? What are we thinking?
I think that lots of projects are just going to integrate with security tooling by default. So for instance, with my infrastructure tools, right now I have to use my observability tools and then separately my security tools. And a lot more projects are integrating, for example, with our open source tools to have them as part of their stack from the start, and people don't have to think about them separately, versus right now people still have to install security focused tools into their cluster separately. And I think that will slowly just merge into their other tools, and then we also don't have to talk about it as much anymore.
Nirvana will ensue. I love it. That's right. So the next thing that we don't know about, I put something in the chat after Sean was talking about the fact that, we're solving problems that we sort of know about, but there are new things that are evolving and coming every day. So I think that the idea of being agile, borrowing that from the development side of the house, aligning those shared goals with folks, I think that's really a key in getting that in early. All right.
One last really quick comment around this too is, when you have something like a Log4j, Spring4 shell, it's a wake-up call. Kind of going back to what Sean said, what's the measurement? The measurement's always going to move, but whenever there's a major incident like that, that's when you get together with your development teams and operational teams and reflect while you're going through the war rooms and go, is this really working and what can we do better? And I got to tell you, a lot of times I'm almost grateful for some of those incidents because they just make us better. And it makes everyone sort of see where we're at. You can tabletop all you want. You can go through all the different exercises you want, but there's nothing like the real deal. And there's also nothing like that collaboration when you get together with these teams and really do what's best for the organization.
Yep. There's a magic that happens when people are on a shared mission. Yep. Exactly 1 minute. Yeah, we're almost done. I have a few folks that I want to thank specially for being here. Everybody is thanked for being here. Cards Brad B, you'll be getting an Amazon gift certificate. Ashley C, Emmanuel B, and Madison G, you will all be getting Amazon gift certificate. You will also be leaving here with your head stuffed full of DevSecOps knowledge from these fantastic panelists. I want to thank them all for joining us. Really, really enjoyed the session, and we lost Mitch. Oh well. I even enjoyed having Mitch on this one. So thank you, everybody. Thanks for folks in chat. 552 raising their hand. What did you want to say something? 552? I don't know how that works. But great to see you raising your hand. I bet you that's like a clapping or something. But thank you so much, everybody in the chat. You guys really lit it up. I love it. Sean, Anais, thank you for joining us. George and Bruno, great to have you here. Shameless plug at the end and all. Thanks, everybody.
See you guys.
See you next time.